Let me describe someone, and you tell me if it sounds familiar. They make a decent salary, not glamorous, but decent. They've got direct deposit, a checking account, a savings account that hovers around the same number most months, and a credit card they pay off more or less every billing cycle. They drive a financed car that looks fine in the parking lot. They live in a place they can afford. They eat out a little. They subscribe to a few things. They send a little bit into a 401k, enough to get the match. By every visible measure, they're doing it right. And yet, year after year, the actual investment account, the one that's supposed to become real wealth, never seems to get past a certain point. It crawls up, it crawls back down when something breaks. Each January feels weirdly close to the previous January. They keep waiting for the year their balance finally takes off, and the year never quite arrives. That feeling, that quiet, I'm doing all the right things and somehow nothing's adding up feeling, is one of the most common cases in personal finance. And it almost never has one cause. There isn't usually a single villain. There's a system, a normal-looking, polite, well-mannered system made up of ordinary choices that quietly absorbs the dollars that were supposed to become the first real compounding base. I'm Nora. I look at financial systems for a living, and the case I want to open today is the case of the missing first 50,000. Why so many decent-earning households can't seem to build that first base, why it matters so much that they do, and which everyday systems are silently rerouting the money that was supposed to get them there. Quick note before we open the file. This is not financial advice or tax advice for your situation. It's honest opinion, education, and experience from years working around financial systems, meant to help you ask better questions and make more informed decisions for yourself. I don't know your numbers. I don't know your job security. I don't know your tax picture. This is a pattern walk, the way a detective might walk you through how a certain kind of case usually unfolds. Take it as a lens, not a prescription. Okay, let's open the file. First, let's talk about why the first 50,000 matters at all. When you start investing, almost everything that happens in the account comes from one place, you. You put in $1,000, the balance goes up by about $1,000, plus or minus whatever the market did that month. The market's contribution looks like noise. Your contributions are the engine. That's normal. That's how every investing journey starts. But there's a point, and it's different for every household, where the math starts to feel different. The account stops looking like a pile of your old paychecks and starts looking like something that's quietly working on its own. For most people in a broadly diversified portfolio, that shift starts becoming visible somewhere in the first $50,000 of invested assets. Not because 50 is a magic number, because that's roughly where, in a normal year, an average market move starts producing dollars that are comparable to a serious saver's annual contribution. Think about it. If you've got $5,000 invested, an average year of market growth might be a few $100. That's not life-changing. That's a tank of gas. But once you've got $50,000 invested, the same average year is now producing something in the neighborhood of $3,000 to $4,000, just from the market doing its thing. That's not noise anymore. That's a real number sitting next to your contributions. It's the first time the account stops being entirely about you and starts being partly about itself. The base has become big enough to participate in its own growth. That's the compounding base. That's the part that, once it exists, makes every future dollar you add work harder than every dollar before it did. And here's the part most finance content skips. Getting from zero to that first compounding base is the hardest stretch of the entire wealth-building journey. Not because the math is complicated. The math is the easiest part. It's the hardest stretch because there's almost no help from the market yet, and your everyday financial systems are usually optimized against you reaching it. So when we ask why so many decent-earning households are still stuck at the same balance year after year, we're not asking a motivational question. We're asking a structural one. What is the system around them quietly doing with the money that was supposed to become that base? Let's put the evidence on the board. The first piece of evidence, and probably the loudest, is the vehicle. I'm not here to tell you what to drive. I genuinely don't care. What I care about is what the car payment is doing inside the household's monthly system, because in a lot of these cases, that single line item is doing more to delay the first compounding base than anything else on the budget. Let's stay concrete. A new car today, in a lot of markets, lands somewhere in the high 30s to low 50s once you add taxes and fees. Most people don't pay cash for that. They finance it over 6, sometimes 7 years. By the time you add the payment, full coverage insurance, dollars a month leaving the household for transportation alone. Now, here's the part that doesn't get said often enough. Most cars lose a significant chunk of their resale value in the first few years. So during the same period where the household is making the largest monthly payment they've ever made, the asset on the other side of that payment is shrinking. That gap between what's owed and what the vehicle is actually worth is real money. It's just invisible until someone tries to sell or trade. And the killer detail is the timing. The car payment shows up in the exact years when the household is also trying to build that first compounding base. Same income window, same paycheck. The dollars don't multiply. Every dollar that goes to financing a depreciating asset is a dollar that didn't go to the part of the balance sheet that would have eventually started paying you. I want to be careful here. I'm not saying don't drive a nice car. I'm not saying buy a beater. I'm saying the question is never just, can I afford this monthly payment? The honest question is, what is this monthly payment costing the future version of me who's trying to get the base built? In a lot of these cases, the answer is a few years of progress, sometimes more. And the household never sees that line item because the line item shows up as nothing happening in the brokerage account, not as a charge on the car loan. That's leak number 1. It's the loudest, but it's not the only one. The next piece of evidence is quieter, and it's about how the household actually moves money around day to day. You'll see a lot of strong opinions online about cash versus credit. Cards are evil, cards are great. Cash is for losers, cash is the only honest money. None of that is the right way to look at it. A credit card isn't moral or immoral. It's a tool. The relevant question is whether the system around that tool is working for the household or against it. When the system is working, a card is a payment method with some real upsides. Fraud protection, statement records you can audit, cashback or points that flow into the same goals the household already cares about, a predictable monthly bill that gets paid in full from money that was already there. The card is, in that case, just a way of consolidating spending that was going to happen anyway, with a small bonus on top. When the system is not working, the same card becomes something completely different. It becomes a soft loan with a high interest rate, used to smooth over weeks where the household spent slightly more than it earned. Carrying a balance becomes normal. Minimum payments become normal. And then, one day, a couple of years in, you realize a meaningful share of every paycheck is going to interest on stuff you've already consumed. That's the part that quietly destroys the compounding base. Not the card itself, not the swipe. The system the household built around the card, where it became a tool for borrowing instead of a tool for tracking. And the same logic applies to almost every modern payment tool. Buy now, pay later, subscriptions, auto pay, apps that round up, apps that round down. None of these are inherently good or bad. Every single one of them becomes good or bad based on the system the household built around it. So when we look at why the first compounding base never gets built, leak number 2 isn't credit and it isn't cash. It's that the household never decided which tool was doing what job. The card was supposed to be a payment method, and somewhere along the way, it became a financing method. And the difference between those two roles is the difference between a base that grows and a base that doesn't. The third piece of evidence is the slowest, and probably the most important. It's the question of margin. By margin, I mean the gap between what comes in and what goes out, month after month, year after year. Not what the household budget says, what actually shows up at the end of the month, after every real expense, every forgotten subscription, every irregular bill, every small upgrade that didn't feel like a decision. This is where the older money habits, the ones a lot of younger savers roll their eyes at, quietly turn out to be right. Things like eat at home most of the time, repair before you replace, buy the version that lasts 10 years instead of the version that lasts 3. Take care of the things you already own. Wait a beat before upgrading. Stretch the obvious things so you can be intentional about the things that actually matter to you. None of these are exciting. None of these will get clipped into a viral short, but every single one of them protects margin. And margin is the only fuel the first compounding base actually runs on. Without margin, the savings rate is structurally pinned to 0. The household can have a nice income, a clean credit score, a fully insured life, a perfectly normal middle-class shape, and still produce almost no investable surplus because the gap between income and lifestyle is too narrow to matter. And here's the part the algorithm doesn't want to admit. Margin doesn't come from finding a hot stock. Margin doesn't come from a hack. Margin doesn't come from a side hustle that demands more from you than the wage already does. Margin almost always comes from 100 quiet, durable habits that compound the same way the investments do. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, and then, after enough years, decisively. That's league number 3. Not the absence of a hot tip, not the absence of a perfect investment strategy, the absence of preserved, defended, intentional margin in everyday life. Now, let's pan the camera back and look at this as a whole system, because that's how it actually plays out. Picture 2 households, same income, same age, same number of kids, similar jobs, almost identical on paper. Household A treats the car like a tool. They drive something safe and reliable, paid off as quickly as possible, kept for years after that. They use credit cards as payment methods, never as financing. They keep a list of fixed monthly costs and re-look at it every year, not because they're cheap, but because they don't want anything sneaking onto it. They protect a real, deliberate margin between income and lifestyle, and they automate the gap into investing before they can see it in their checking account. Their balance sheet is boring. Their first compounding base shows up somewhere in their early to mid-30s, and from there, the math starts helping them. Household B looks more impressive at every snapshot. Their car is newer, their phone is newer, their kitchen looks better in a photo. They use credit cards too, and they have great rewards, but they also occasionally carry a balance, and the balance creeps up around big life events. Their fixed monthly costs grow with every raise, more or less by reflex. Their savings rate looks fine on paper, but the actual investable surplus stays narrow because lifestyle keeps swallowing the margin before it can become a base. At 40, these 2 households are not in the same place, even though they look almost the same on the outside. Household A has a base that's starting to do real work. Household B has a balance that still feels like the last few years of contributions, plus or minus the market. The difference, and I want to be careful here, is not that Household B is reckless. Household B isn't dumb. Household B made a series of completely reasonable-looking decisions, each one defensible on its own. The car was fine. The card had great points. The subscriptions were minor. The kitchen needed updating eventually. The raises felt earned. The problem is that nobody, anywhere in the household system, was protecting the dollars that were supposed to become the first compounding base. So every reasonable decision quietly came at the expense of that base, and the base never got built. This is the case. This is what the missing first $50,000 actually looks like. There is one more piece of evidence on the board, and this one matters because it is easy to confuse with doing something fancy. It's the benefits and tax wrapper layer. When people hear that phrase, their eyes glaze over. I get it. Nobody wakes up excited to read plan documents. But this is where a lot of quiet wealth gets built, because the system gives certain dollars better treatment than other dollars. A dollar that goes into the right account at the right time with the right match, deduction, or tax treatment, can be worth more than a regular dollar sitting in a regular checking account.
That's not a hack. That's just how the rules are written.
The obvious example is the employer match. If your workplace offers a real match on retirement contributions and you are not capturing it, that is not just a missed investment. That's part of your compensation package being left on the table. It is one of the few places in personal finance where the word free is not totally ridiculous, as long as the vesting rules and job situation make sense for you. Then there are tax-advantaged accounts, retirement accounts, health savings accounts for people who are eligible, brokerage accounts for money beyond those buckets. Each one has trade-offs. Each one has rules. Each one can be misused. But together, they form the plumbing that determines how much of your income gets converted into long-term assets and how much leaks out before it ever has a chance to compound. This is why the first $50,000 is not just about spending less, it's about routing better. Two households can save the same dollar amount and end up with different long-term results because one household routed the dollars through a system that picked up matches, deductions, tax-free growth, or clean long-term investment behavior, while the other household left the dollars floating in checking, spent them during a stressful month, or used them to clean up old interest charges. Again, this is not me telling you which account to use. Your taxes, health plan, income, employer plan, debt, and emergency fund all matter. This is why financial advice has to be personal. But as a system diagnosis, the point is clear. If the household never learns the basic map of its own wrappers, the first compounding base has to fight uphill through taxes, friction, and missed matching dollars. So leak number 4 is not ignorance in some insulting sense, it's unclaimed structure. The money system has legal pathways designed to help long-term dollars survive. A lot of people never use them fully because nobody explained them in plain English, or because the paperwork looked boring, or because the month-to-month pressure felt louder than the long-term benefit. That is how the first $50,000 gets stolen without anyone stealing it. Not by one dramatic scam, by a car payment that looked normal, by a card balance that looked temporary, by a lifestyle margin that looked harmlessly thin, by benefits and tax wrappers that looked too boring to study. And once you see all 4 leaks together, the case gets a lot less mysterious. Okay. Let's close the file with something you can actually use. If everything we just walked through is true, then the move isn't to find a better fund. The move isn't to find a smarter strategy. The move isn't to chase a hotter return. The move is to build, deliberately, a household system that protects the first compounding base until it has time to exist. So here's what I'd actually track, not what I'd tell you to buy. What I'd track. Track your fixed monthly burn, specifically the part that's hard to undo. Housing, transportation, including the payment, the insurance, and the fuel, insurance lines that auto-renew, subscriptions that don't end. The reason this number matters is that every dollar locked into fixed burn is a dollar that can't become the base. The lower and more flexible your fixed burn, the more room the base has to form. Track your savings rate, not your account balance. The account balance will lie to you during the slow phase. It will feel disappointing when the market is sideways. It will feel exciting when the market is up. Neither feeling is information. Your savings rate, the percentage of your gross income going into long-term invested assets, is the number actually under your control. If that number is going up over time, the base is being built, regardless of what the balance is doing this quarter. Track the role of every payment tool you use. For each one, ask the boring question. Is this a payment method or a financing method? If it's supposed to be a payment method, is it actually being used as one? If a tool keeps drifting into a financing role, that drift is leaking the dollars that were supposed to become the base. Reassign the tool or remove it. And if you're a late starter, this still matters.
The point isn't that you had to begin at 22 to benefit from the system. The point is that once you understand what is actually rerouting the money, you can stop bleeding the base and start building it.
The clean lens I'd send you home with is this: defend the base before you decorate the life.
That's it. That's the whole thing. The new car can wait until the base exists. The bigger place can wait until the base exists. The lifestyle upgrades can keep showing up, slowly, after the base exists. Because once the base exists, you've got something that grows, whether you're paying attention or not. Before the base exists, everything you do is uphill, and every leak in the system is hauling you backward. The first 50,000 isn't a flex. It's not a finish line. It's not something to brag about. It's the boring, quiet, structural moment where your money stops needing you to do everything and starts pulling some of its own weight. That's the case. Defend the base. Protect the margin. Pick the role of every tool you use. And the next time the system around you tries to redirect those dollars into something visible, ask the only question that matters. Is this growing the base, or is this stealing from it? I'll see you in the next one.